So now we are going just to explain a little bit about the workshop. So we have already finished with the business cases. We are going to share actually what we are trying to do with the workshop that we have later on. So what we want to do is work with you to identify the actions that Space4Impact should take to accelerate the adoption of space technologies for impact. So after hearing these business cases, these use cases, and yesterday's startup, we have seen that there is still some challenges and some barriers for adoption of those technologies and for adoption for impact and for accelerating the SDGs. So we really want to work with you to come up with solutions and help us to build the roadmap that Space4Impact should follow moving forward. So for the workshop, we are going to focus on 3 areas. One will be education, so we have some challenges there. One on capital, and one in community. So what we are going to do is to share with you the identified pain points that we have identified through the different stakeholders, then share with you the main challenge that we are trying to resolve. Then we will work together because we need your brains as well to identify potential solutions. Then we will vote for the best ideas, and then we will select the solution that we are going to share with everyone afterwards. So the structure of the team, so we have the Space4Impact team here. The first group will be with me and with Edo, and we will tackle the education challenge. The second one will be with Christian and Raphael, the capital challenge. And then the third one will be the challenge community with Grégoire and Cyril. So every participant will be moved into a breakout room with one of the facilitators to tackle the challenge. So before we start, we are going to give a small break so everyone can go for a coffee, and then we'll see you in the breakout rooms. Thank you so much, and see you right now. So one of the challenges that we wanted to resolve was how might we educate non-space corporates, public sector and investors about the space technologies and its applications for impact. And we had a very great discussion, and Edo is going to share the ideas that we came up with and what we're actually discussing.
So it was a very interesting session because we had, I think, representative of all sides, even if we were a tiny group. And we were able to have somebody from corporate, somebody from the business side, somebody from a more applied research side. And what came up with is that basically we need to understand our counterpart, and we need to understand the language and the goals of the counterpart. In the end, it's a transaction, and we want that the counterpart is buying our solution, not in economic terms, but he understands that it can have a positive impact from his side. So, in other words, avoid technical words. Talk like if you would talk to a 5-year-old kid, or talk how you would explain it to your grandma. In other words, that was a very good point. Mm-hmm. And but how to get to the right people that are willing to listen to you, and how to understand the pain points that the people that are not adopting yet space data technologies and infrastructure. How can we get there? And one point is that it is necessary for the people to get into the business areas to capture the needs and pains. For example, I can think about visiting their fairs, getting into venues that are not of our usual context, to get into the language and to present also the case of space in other sectors and verticals. Mm-hmm. In order to communicate in simpler means, we should also forget about integrals, microchip, machine learning networks, but we should try to get into a simpler way of communicating using infographics and visualization in order to communicate the benefits. How we do it, it's important to enable the quality, but how we communicate in an effective way, it's important to break on through the wall of understanding.
Thank you so much, Edo. We need to move to the next challenge. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you. So next, we have the next challenge, which was the capital. So the main challenge that we are trying to resolve or trying to get some solution is how might we help startups, specifically startups, to get capital and NGOs to get budget for these projects, because we have identified some challenges on that front. Capital, Christian, do you want to share your challenges, your solutions?
Sure, thank you very much. So we were coming basically from a classic approach, classic investors, also funding options ranging up to ICOs as on our ideation board, but it turned out then to be that in the voting, we actually came to this to a matchmaking portal for startups, for investors, but also for traditional organizations, public sector authorities, because that is actually missing, that we bring all of the stakeholders together, but from a funding perspective, and educate these different stakeholders on this portal, and also on a kind of level beyond that, maybe also through Space4Impact, through events, in the sense of funding and funding processes, and also how to basically pitch and how to get money in general. Because the main thing is, on the one hand, that startups seeking for education, understanding, material, instructions, how to pitch, how funding processes look like. So it's basically about mentoring in that regard, but also investors, traditional investors, seek for understanding, what we heard already several times here, for how to actually invest into space startups. What is my skin in the game there? Why I should do this? And this has to do with use cases, and not only with impact-oriented use cases, but in general with use cases. So we need to explain these use cases and to show them and bring also these people on board. So not just the space investors, but the traditional ones. It should be also an interdisciplinary mentoring approach. This is also one of the ideas that came out in the end, how people could engage. So include like different mentors, include engineers, but also VCs, and bring them all together and mentor like in the interdisciplinary group, one startup. That would be also quite new. The last thing what was mentioned also was that it is that it should include especially also the public sector orgs, because often this is like a walled garden. So the grant business and all of this is like completely excluded from venture capital. It often has nothing to do with each other, and to bring this like together and also start a discussion between European grants, for example, and venture capitalists on this platform, and creating an instrument, for example, which is combining that, would be also interesting. That's of course the ideas in a very rough way. There was even more, of course, what we were discussing, but that's basically it.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And then let's move. I just checking the time. So then let's move to the next challenge, which is the community. So how actually might we facilitate the contact and collaboration between all the right stakeholders? One of the pain points that they came actually across, the other challenges as well, is how we can be sure that we are getting to the right contacts, how we are sure that we are getting to the right stakeholders to get started in the process. Sometimes you start and then there is not the right people, so actually it goes nowhere. So how actually can facilitate that contact and the collaboration between all the stakeholders? Cyril Grégoire.
Yes, thank you, Adela. I will summarize our discussion, and of course, thank you to the panel for the insight. So first of all, I would like to say that the participant of our panel shared his pain points, and so what was identified already, and here are the main ideas. So basically, our top ideas, first of all, could be in this sequence where the mapping of the existing solutions. So what is already existing in the public but also private sector in terms of community and in terms of support to the community is very important. Having a marketplace for a consumer-facing space product in particular, but so having a tool like this, it was identified as one of the important part, and then setting up challenges, so going down to more concrete activities that have to be solved jointly, and it's very important here, involving all the stakeholders. It's also at the high level. Then during our discussion, of course, it came out that it's nice to have a tool like a marketplace or doing a mapping before, but it is very important to have it easy of use, and simple communication around it should be very key here. And basically, and that's also coming back to what was said already in the other panels, having a facilitator around, so having an entity could be here in this specific case, Space4Impact. So to put the people together and translate basically the different things which are between the different stakeholders, it's very important. Mm-hmm. About the pilots, so that's really where it should be encouraged. So encourage to conduct pilot projects with the idea to convince broadly about the use of the space technology, space products in particular. Mm-hmm. So basically, that was what came out of this discussion. And also interesting enough is that all of you knows already. So there is a marketplace on InnoLoft, and of course then it's also to us to facilitate and trigger the interest on this kind of tool. So great.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I think we have also to think how you can keep engaging that community. Maybe that will through the education and the content that we're going to bring into that. So it's about putting everyone together and then helping them to get engaged and resolving the right things, right? So I think all the challenges are all connected. Okay, great. So 10:57. So thank you everyone that stayed in the workshop. Sorry.
We actually have the feedback from finance group 2 as well, which I think we should go through, in fairness that, the people who worked on the ideas. So basically, it's actually very similar to Christian's group's ideas, which I guess in a way is positive that there's sort of a common thread evolving, and similar also to Christian's group, it split into 2 sections, basically. One, sources of financing, where there wasn't a whole lot of surprises, because at the end of the day, we all know that there's VCs and angels and government grants. The only thing which got upvoted here was competitions, which of course is interesting, because we obviously have a very prominent example 20 years ago now of the X Prize for space. And then the second section was basically how people can access the financing, again, which I probably think is the more interesting part. How can we facilitate that? And some interesting ideas there that came up, again, some of them similar to Christian's group, is a facilitating tool where startups and other stakeholders can find investors who are willing to invest in space by geography, by specialty. Another thing that was mentioned is that it would be helpful if startups had more people on their advisory boards, or even boards who actually have industry expertise and hence can facilitate a dialogue with the corporates, who obviously hold a lot of the purse strings and the budgets that could flow into startups. And lastly, sort of the educational part, which has also been mentioned before, and part of the startups with regard to explaining to startups how the fundraising process works and what kind of capital you can access at what stage, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's some of the key points from that group.
So that goes also part of the education part that will be more educating also startups on financing.
The education thing was mentioned both with regard to the startups and in the end in our discussion as well with regard to generalist investors, where it seems pretty clear anecdotally that the vast majority of investors who are not space specialized investors, they still need a lot of education on the sector.
Okay, great. Super, thank you so much. So now that we went to the 3 challenges, so what we are trying to do with this, so as I was saying before, we really appreciate your time helping us to have some ideas and insights on how we can actually bring the gap on adopting the space technologies for impact. So the next steps, we are going to gather all the insights, we are going to think a lot, continue working on it, and then we will build the Space4Impact roadmap on the actions that we need to take to be sure that we actually break all those barriers. So I think we are super on time, which is great. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for being part of our journey. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions, want to be more involved into the ecosystem. So feel free. We are all on this together. So thank you so much for being here today.